If you told me before Scarlet and Violet came out that Murkrow would be the #1 most used Pokemon, I'd have laughed in your face. In the 12 years I've played Pokemon competitively at the top level, Murkrow has ranged from a really specific niche pick to completely unviable. But thanks to the extremely specific conditions that are present thanks to the Pokemon that are in Scarlet and Violet, Murkrow became the #1 most used competitive Pokemon. To understand why this happened, we first have to understand how Murkrow works. Let's start simple, with its typing. Murkrow is a dark and flying type Pokemon, which is a surprisingly good defensive type. In the past couple years, Mandibuzz, Yveltal, and Galarian Moltres have all performed really well, in part thanks to the value that this typing provides. It's weak to 4 common offensive types, with Rock and Fairy being especially common, but you do get a lot of value in exchange for these weaknesses. 2 immunities to Ground and Psychic, 3 resistances to Ghost, Dark, and Grass, and the unique benefit of the Dark typing, being immune to moves affected by the ability Prankster. This is a really big deal, but let's come back to that later. Hey, before we continue with the story, I just wanted to quickly tell you that I'm hosting an enormous event tomorrow. It's a huge tournament where these 8 content creators will be battling it out in competitive Pokemon after being coached by some of the best players there are. It'll be streamed on this channel at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern time. You're not going to want to miss it, so make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss this and other cool projects that I do. Okay, so if the typing is good, why is it only now that Murkrow has become popular? The first piece of the puzzle has to do with its stats. Murkrow's best stat is its speed. I would say it's a perfectly average speed stat. But the issue is, that's Murkrow's best stat. Its offensive stats are way too low to be consistently contributing to battles. Murkrow's defensive stats, on the other hand, To put Murkrow's stats into perspective, out of every Pokemon that has ever been considered popular or mainstream in competitive Pokemon, Murkrow has the worst stats by a long shot. So by this metric, there has literally never been a worse good Pokemon than Murkrow. And Murkrow's abysmal stats are a big part of why it's never been good before. I should note that Murkrow's stats are a little bit better than they appear on paper because of its evolution Honchkrow. There's an item called Eviolite, which raises your defense and special defense stats by 50%. This is an absolutely incredible item, but there's a catch. It only works on Pokemon that can still evolve further. The only real drawback to Eviolite is that it takes your item slot, which is a very reasonable price for such an incredible benefit, but it does lock you out from using items that boost your damage output or give you other kinds of utility. You guys know Pokemon isn't the only monster collecting game out there, right? Let me introduce you to Dragon City, today's sponsor. Dragon City is a mobile game, available on all devices, and it's completely free. In Dragon City, you can collect over 1,000 dragons with unique designs, elements, and rarities to build your own dragon empire. Your empire will sit upon a floating island sprinkled with farms, habitats, buildings, and yes, tons of dragons. You'll be able to breed and raise your dragons, watching as they evolve to their full potential. You'll also find dragons of your favorite YouTubers like Mr. Beast and Dude Perfect. Teach them new attacks, level up, and battle in the master arenas, where you can challenge your friends and other Dragon City players. Join an alliance to get access to exclusive team events and chests full of awesome rewards. Download Dragon City by clicking the link in the description or scan this QR code, and you'll get a special free starter pack with 70,000 food, plus the epic Perperius Dragon. Thanks again to Dragon City for sponsoring this video. Now, even with Eviolite equipped, Murkrow's stats are still mediocre at best. And wait a second, why is nobody using Honchkrow if Eviolite doesn't even improve Murkrow's stats that much? The answer lies in the abilities that Murkrow and Honchkrow have access to. Murkrow and Honchkrow each have 3 possible abilities that they can use. They both get access to Insomnia and Super Luck, which prevents you from falling asleep and raises your critical hit odds respectively, but the third ability each of them gets is unique. Honchkrow gets the ability Moxie, which raises your attack stat every time you pick up a KO. But Murkrow gets the ability Prankster. If a Pokemon has the ability Prankster, any non-damaging move that they use will gain an increased stage of priority. In other words, if a Prankster Pokemon uses a move that doesn't do any damage, it'll probably move before most other Pokemon, even if the user is slower. Now, when I was a kid playing through Pokemon, I thought moves that didn't do damage were worthless, but in all actuality, they form the bedrock of competitive Pokemon. The most common moves used by Prankster Pokemon are ones that benefit the entire team for multiple turns going forward. Common examples include Light Clay Grimmsnarl using Reflect and Light Screen to increase its team survivability by 50% for the next 8 turns, Whimsicott and Tornadus using Tailwind to double their team speed for the next 4 turns, and Grimmsnarl and Thundurus immediately using Thunder Wave to paralyze opposing fast, threatening Pokemon before they can move. This is just the tip of the iceberg though. There are a lot of really good non-damaging moves that are made even better when used with priority. Prankster is such a good ability that just giving it to a Pokemon immediately raises its viability. Pokemon that would otherwise be good become great, like Whimsicott and Grimmsnarl. And Pokemon that would otherwise be bad or straight up unusable become usable, like Riolu and Purloin. Every single Prankster Pokemon has been used competitively before, and even a Pokemon like Cottony has won an official Pokemon regional tournament because it helped beat Primal Kyogre and Mega Rayquaza. This is the reason I mentioned earlier that Dark types being immune to Prankster affected attacks is a really big deal. It's especially relevant because even though Murkrow is the most used competitive Pokemon, it can't affect other Murkrow with its Prankster moves, which is the majority of the moves that it uses. And Murkrow's moves are the next piece of the puzzle to figuring out how this thing became the most used Pokemon. You see, there's only 6 Pokemon evolutionary lines in Scarlet and Violet that actually get access to the ability Prankster. Of these 6, really only Murkrow and Grimmsnarl are used. So obviously, Prankster isn't the sole reason that's caused Murkrow to skyrocket in popularity. What's the difference? Of the 6 Pokemon lines that get Prankster in Scarlet and Violet, Murkrow is the only Pokemon that also gets access to the move Tailwind. Tailwind is an incredibly powerful move in competitive Pokemon. Doubling the speeds of your entire team for a whopping 4 turns after only using the move once is an incredible return on a very modest investment. And if you can set up Tailwind before any other Pokemon has moved for the turn, your partner immediately receives the benefit, which basically gives you 1 whole extra turn of use. And Prankster allows you to use Tailwind before any other Pokemon has attacked. The combination of Tailwind and Prankster has been shown time and time again to be incredibly powerful. It was even present when I first started playing competitively all the way back in 2011. In modern day competitive Pokemon, there are 2 Prankster Tailwind users that stand clearly above the rest, Whimsicott and Tornadus. The thing is, neither Whimsicott nor Tornadus are currently in Scarlet and Violet. So if you want to make use of the incredibly potent pairing of Tailwind and Prankster, there is only one option out of the 400 Pokemon Pokedex, Murkrow. But even the combination of Tailwind and Prankster is not the only reason that Murkrow has shot up in popularity. And the other reason actually has nothing to do with Murkrow at all. What it does have to do with is a new pair of Pokemon that have one of the most bizarre, unique, and powerful interactions of all time. I'm talking, of course, about Dendozo and Tatsugiri. These 2 Pokemon have a very interesting fusion mechanic where if they're ever on the field together at the same time, Tatsugiri will hop into Dendozo's mouth and become unable to attack and basically invincible. When this happens, the battle becomes a 1 versus 2, but in exchange, Dendozo gets a +2 boost in all of its stats, which basically doubles them. It also causes Dendozo's signature move, Order Up, to give it an additional stat boost every time it's used, even if it's blocked or it misses. Now, fighting a 1 against 2 is obviously a huge disadvantage, but Dendozo is so powerful that out of everything in the format, it quickly became the focal point. The problem is that, thanks to terrestrialization, it's actually really hard to consistently beat Dendozo. The grass and electric type attacks that in any other game would have been effective at stopping it now don't work so well because of Terra Grass or Terra Dragon. Clear Smog Amoonguss saw a huge rise in popularity, but Dendozo players reacted by running Terra Steel Dendozo, becoming immune to the attack. Even Amoonguss trying to slow Dendozo down with Spore had to worry about Substitute, Terra Flying, Terra Blast, and of course Terra Grass. In other words, whenever someone thought they'd figured out a consistent way to finally beat Dendozo, the Dendozo players adapted with a new piece of technology and once again gained the edge. Okay, we get it. Dendozo is strong, but why are you talking about it in a video about Murkrow? Well, it just so happens that the Pokemon suited to best counter every type of Dendozo is actually Murkrow. And the reason has to do with another move that Murkrow can learn, Haze. Haze is a non-damaging move that resets all stat changes on the field back to neutral. So a Pokemon that was at -2 attack would find itself back at +0. And a Pokemon that, I don't know, had all of its stats boosted by 2 Well, all of those would go back to +0 as well. Haze is unlike most other moves in the game in that it affects every Pokemon on the field, including the user. Moves like Haze are coded differently than other moves, which gives them some special properties. Unlike Spore, you can't block Haze with Substitute. You also can't block it with Protect. Now, if you've been paying attention, I can guess what you're thinking next. Wolf, you said Prankster attacks don't work against Dark-type Pokemon. Won't Dendozo just start running Terra Dark to block Prankster Haze? And that's very astute of you, and for nearly every other move that Murkrow learns, you would be right. But Haze is such a weird move that even when used by a Prankster Pokemon, it still affects Dark types. There is absolutely nothing that Dendozo can do that will stop Prankster Haze. Now, if all Haze did was counter Dendozo, it would still be worth running on Murkrow. But it can do even more. Two of the best Pokemon in the format are special attackers that drop their special attack stat when they use their powerful move. I'm talking about Gholdengo and Hydreigon. Gholdengo has one of the best offensive moves ever made. It's called Make It Rain. It's a steel-type special attack that hits both opponents and has a super high base power. But as a drawback, it lowers the user's special attack stat by 1 stage after it's used. Hydreigon has access to the incredibly iconic attack Draco Meteor, which does a ton of damage, but lowers Hydreigon's special attack stat by 2 stages after it connects. Now, normally, the way you'd get rid of these stat drops is to switch the Pokemon out, but thanks to Haze Murkrow, you can remove these drops every turn while continuing to spam these powerful moves. It probably goes without saying, but Haze is also useful against opponents who try to lower your stats with abilities like Intimidate and moves like Snarl and Icy Wind. These tactics aren't everywhere, but having some insurance against them is definitely valuable. So not only does Murkrow have one of the best team support options thanks to the combination of Prankster and Tailwind, it also is uniquely well positioned because of how good Prankster Haze is in this specific format. Unlike many support Pokemon, Murkrow is actually able to exert offensive pressure despite its mediocre offensive stats. This is because of a unique move called Foul Play. Foul Play is a strong Dark-type move that calculates damage using the target's attack stat, unlike every other physical move in the game, which calculates damage using the user's physical attack stat. In other words, whether Murkrow has an attack stat of 50 or 200, it's irrelevant to Foul Play. And because Foul Play is a Dark-type move and Murkrow is a Dark-type Pokemon, any damage it does is increased by 50% due to something called Stab. Nearly all Murkrow will run Tailwind, Haze, and Foul Play, but the 4th attack can really be whatever your team needs. To help win the speed war against opposing Murkrow teams, moves like Icy Wind and Quash can be used to slow down opposing Murkrow's partners. Disruptive moves like Taunt and Torment are popular to further irritate opponents who think they can ignore Murkrow. Some Murkrow run Screech to lower an opponent's defense stat, and pair Murkrow with a strong physical attacker to take advantage. And of course, the classic safe option of Protect is always a good choice. I want to circle back one more time to Murkrow's Dark typing and why it's such a big deal in allowing Murkrow to succeed. Let's pretend that Dark types are not immune to Prankster. We'd likely see something of an arms race, where Murkrow would start investing in their speed so they could outspeed and taunt opposing Murkrow before they were able to get taunted themselves. At first, it would only be a little investment, but eventually, max speed Murkrow would become commonplace. And on a Pokemon like Murkrow, who's already hurting for stats, this would make it so much worse against the rest of the field. Because Murkrow doesn't have to worry about this, it could afford to invest all of its stat points in survivability. Before the rank ladder dropped, Murkrow was nothing but a whisper. People identified that it should be strong, but I mean, it's Murkrow. How good could it actually be? Within a week, Murkrow was everywhere. It was like an infestation. It dominated online tournaments and flooded the ladder. But Murkrow's time at the top couldn't last forever. As people became more comfortable with the format, they got better at playing around Murkrow, especially Dendozo players. Even though Dendozo itself couldn't beat Murkrow, a smart Dendozo player would perpetually threaten setting up Dendozo, which would force a Murkrow player to keep their Murkrow alive. They'd often need to give up a ton of ground, sacrificing their Pokemon and positioning, and in the end, they might stop Dendozo, but they'd probably lose the game anyway. By the time the first official tournament rolled around, Murkrow had taken one of the hardest falls from grace that I have ever seen. Out of the 32 teams that advanced to the final phase of the tournament, only 2 of them had Murkrow. 6% usage would be bad enough, but out of the top 128 teams, over 20% of them had Murkrow. Meaning it wasn't that people weren't bringing Murkrow, it was that they weren't winning with it. The next competitive rule set begins February 1st and introduces the Paradox Pokemon. almost all of which Murkrow matches up extremely poorly against. So for now, it seems like Murkrow's moment of brilliance is over. But I think there's a lesson here. Even if there are Pokemon out there that do what you do, but better. Even if no one has taken you seriously in over a decade. Even if Game Freak themselves decides the only way you're ever going to be viable is if you evolve, under the right circumstances, with just the right condition. Even you can become the best. Thanks for watching, and make sure to download Dragon City to receive your free rewards.